Joining. This is ENC 3370, Writing with AI. My students and I are really excited that you're here with us. I want to introduce you to first. Ewan MLIS is an assistant librarian at the University of South Florida Libraries in Tampa, where he serves as the liaison to the College of Engineering and the Department of Physics. In this role, he delivers specialized research support, instruction, and outreach to students and faculty in STEM disciplines. And he's one of the members of the Link AI development team at USF Libraries. For those of you who don't know, Link is a very interesting AI agent, a kind of chatbot that the library folks here at USF have built to help us, scholars, readers, students, engage better with the library's resources. So we'll be talking about that today. And Lieta is the copyright and intellectual property librarian at the University of South Florida Libraries, where she also serves as associate director for integrated research and impact services. Her work focuses on empowering authors and researchers to navigate copyright, fair use, and digital authorship in ways that promote public access and scholarly integrity. With advanced training from Copyright X and the WIPO Academy, Schmidt has led initiatives on copyright literacy, AI ethics, and responsible data use. A recent scholarship explores how digital platforms obscure authorship and complicate attribution. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you for
us.
having me.
Awesome. So first things first, let's show everyone what Link is, what Link does, and could you please give us a demo?
Sure, absolutely. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let me pop over real quick to the library's actual website. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
All right, perfect. So Link, our chatbot through the library's website, is short for Library Information and Knowledge. We built this out over the last year as part of a grant project that the library put out specifically for AI projects. Our goal with Link, and we'll get into it a little bit more as we're talking about it here, was to build something that kind of seamlessly fit into our ecosystem. So if you're familiar with the library web pages in any way, you actually may not be able to find Link immediately. That's very intentional. It actually is baked right into our traditional chat service. So naturally, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., Link itself is actually trying to push users over to our live operators. And we'd be happy to explain that a little bit further, but we really wanted there still to be a human role within the chat interaction space there, to be able to allow our users to still connect with a librarian or library professional at will. However, in those hours that we don't have people staffing that chat, or if folks need a quicker answer, something about some basic element to the library resources, or just trying to find their way across the web pages, that's where Link steps in. So you can go ahead, or between 10 and 5, you can choose to continue with Link. And from here, we start conversing with Link. Link offers a couple different directions that you can take it. It has the more traditional chatbot approach, where we could just click one of these paths, find research, to find services, and get help. However, Link is also a large language model when it comes down to it. It uses a ChatGPT model at its core through the Microsoft Copilot environment, which allows us to kind of talk to it like a regular chat service through the library. So I'm just going to go ahead real quick and ask it, what is the Tampa library address and what are the hours? Also, I book a study room. So from there, using that large language model, it's going to go ahead and review the knowledge documents and web pages that are made available to it, and it's going to go ahead and compile an answer based off of those. Now, this is still an AI model. It's still capable of making mistakes, as we noted above here. However, for the most part, it does a pretty decent job. So we'll go ahead and scroll through its answer here. So first and foremost, it says that the specific address here was not provided, but it immediately refers us over to a web page where you can find that. It has current hours posted here, as well as our study room booking information here. One of the big things we really emphasized with Link, because this was something that we ran into as an issue early on, was really encouraging the usage of links themselves, kind of a play on the name there. The reason we did this is a lot of its knowledge is actually based out of different knowledge documents, like you can see right here, citation 2 and citation 5, as well as some web pages that may need to be expanded upon and dove into individually. So for every answer it gives, it's always supposed to provide a link. And what we really appreciate here is even if it gets something wrong, which is becoming less and less as we go on, a user can always go find the actual source there. That was really important to us, that there wasn't this black box of knowledge, and that it was something that we could work with. Similar to other large language models, you can also ask follow-up questions. What floors are the quietest to study with a group of? And it'll carry that context from the previous conversation and hopefully answer your question, hopefully in depth with a provided link. Again, most of this knowledge is based off of our knowledge documents that we in the library have built out. Some of this is web pages, so you'll see a web page linking out to the study rooms here. But these specific knowledge documents, we actually had to build out custom. Keep in mind here that Link and the AI models that we build out through the library do not have outside knowledge of what libraries or really anything that's happening at USF. We've had to build that out and build that knowledge base. And while on some ends that can be really helpful, on the other ends that can also be a huge time drain and something we had to be very conscious of. I'll scroll up and show you guys this answer real quick. Yep, and it's got some breakdowns of quiet study floors and whatnot. Be very, very helpful there. Something that we included specifically, and it'll be the last thing I show you guys real quick before we dive into some further questions, was actually our assessment process for Link. So every time Link provides a generative answer, one that it's coming up with its own based off of those knowledge documents and web pages, it'll actually ask if the user is satisfied with that answer. If they say yes, fantastic. It'll continue to seek further answers for them if needed. However, every time a user finds an answer that doesn't feel sufficient, maybe it doesn't make sense, maybe there's something missing to it, maybe it's even got bad information there, a hallucination, the user can always denote no. And we quite like this because, one, it allows the user to give us immediate feedback about whether or not answers are good or not. But it additionally allows them to feel like they aren't just talking to a wall. If I were to say, no, this isn't what I'm looking for, it will apologize and say that we can talk further about it, or we can escalate to one of those library professionals we talked about before. That is really cool. Yeah, it is very cool. We very much wanted it to be something that people could critique, that they could always escalate to those live operators, and that it wasn't a barrier for them to still use library resources, especially as this model has gone on. While it's in a pretty decent state now, early on, we were testing with a lot of folks who were getting some mixed answers because the knowledge base had to be refined over and over again, and things had to be clarified for the model. That this process made it a lot easier for us to go about that. The other thing I was just going to briefly mention, you can't see it at this point, but for any answer that is generative, if you do not get a link immediately, we have a follow-up tab as well to ask it to follow up with a link. Transparency is everything here for us, and we want it so that users can go dive into those resources themselves, and that link is more of a bridge across resources instead of being the end resource itself. So we'll stop there. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but this is a great kind of starting place to kind of see Link in action.
I am blown away. I have tons of questions, but before I ask them, I want to ask Lieta if she wants to add something to this demo, anything from your perspective?
Yes. Well, Evan mentioned transparency, and part of the transparency is actually a link that Link provides in the beginning. So if I could jump to sharing my screen, get this queued up. If you were to follow that link, you would land on a special page of our AI tools and resources guide. So this is a guide we have developed over the course of a few years now to provide information about generative AI for people who are new users, people who are medium level users. And this is also a place where we put all the information we have on what is Link, what is the project, where did it come from, why are we doing it? And a basic idea of how it's designed. And then it all ties back to our principles for the use of artificial intelligence by the USF Library. So in the libraries, we also had a task force looking at what we wanted to define as our principles to adhere to for the development and for the use of AI technologies. This was specifically important to us because there are a lot of publishers and vendors who are developing AI projects of their own for research purposes, but
Right.
Maybe their privacy standards aren't quite up to the standards that the library wants to support for its user base. Libraries are very invested in user privacy, in the freeness of individuals to pursue whatever research interests they have without being monitored.
Hmm.
And part of that, we purge our checkout records and things like that. So the products that we contract with sort of need to meet that level of privacy expectations. So we developed our statement of values, the role of AI in the USF libraries, and then the resources and our disclaimer that we're facilitating the research program, not really driving any instructor's use of AI. And that's part of our transparency. It's also just part of how we approach AI at the libraries. And I can also provide links directly to those resources.
Perfect. Thanks so much. You actually kind of anticipated the next two questions that I was going to ask, so I love that. The first was going to be about the processes through which you went about building a link. And I saw a very neat diagram there about like where user queries go, what's your knowledge base, and things like that. Could one of you please share that and talk to us about your workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that's been revised over time. I'll go back to the page that Leetta had up, the LibGuide page, because I think that's a great
Mhm.
page just to kind of reference while we're talking about this. Give me 2 seconds. So when we initially developed Outlink, this was actually one of the first things we worked through was what is the core workflow going to be? While specifics in the maybe the content that Link was trained on have changed over
Uh,
time.
Even could you
Um,
zoom in a little bit
yeah,
to the diagram,
100%.
please?
Yeah,
Thank you.
let's do it. There we go.
Perfect.
So when we first got started, the biggest thing we wanted to first off leverage the large language model. That was one of the things we saw is there had been chat bot operators previously, but they were largely like scripted out paths. And while we do have that to a degree, for the most part, the model is using the large language model as the backbone. So we wanted to understand if we were going to leverage this, what kind of questions would be coming in. And so actually one of the first things we did as we were building out this is trying to understand what these user queries were going to be. We actually went over dozens and dozens of chat transcripts from our existing chat service in order to kind of
Interesting.
identify maybe paths that we'd be going down. We also reached out to those different stakeholders for these departments and these resources and say, hey, what are we missing here currently? We had them test the bot itself, and it was really interesting as well for them to find out, oh, well, the websites that they believe currently cover some of these subjects don't actually cover them as well as they thought. The chatbot was using those, and there was gaps there. Same thing happened with our web pages as a whole. We had to do a full sitemap to better understand this. And so a large mapping process, I feel like, went on early on to those understand the questions we were going to get and to understand the knowledge we actually had access to for the chatbot. That knowledge base was huge for us because while this
Right.
sounds really easy as, hey, look through our knowledge base and our topics, sometimes we didn't even know the kind of questions students would be asking. One of the ones that popped up really early on was questions about our bookstore. Even though the bookstore doesn't operate through the library, we get a lot of questions about the bookstore. And when the chatbot only knew about the
Interesting.
library and not about the bookstore, it assumed that questions about returning rental textbooks were about returning textbooks to the library, which isn't correct. Now, if somebody at the front desk was answering that, they would understand that. But these are the kind of things we had to figure out a lot of times through trial and error, to be totally frank with you. On the front end, we did several focus groups with faculty, students, and folks inside the library. And that was critical. It felt embarrassing at first because you were realizing how little coverage it had on certain topics, but it was so helpful for us to cover those so that once we got in front of actual end users, it wasn't
Right.
making mistakes about basic things that we should have covered. One of my favorite examples of hallucination it had was early on. I had a user who said that it wasn't happy with the response it was given. And the chatbot didn't have a way to escalate and or report issues about its responses. And so it encouraged the end user to call the police because it was
What?
the only source of like escalation that it could find that was relevant to being a bad actor. It was a bit extreme and it was very early on, but these were the kind of things that seemed
Okay.
crazy, but the chatbot didn't know better. Something additionally that I'd like to point out is we did not have the chatbot leverage a pre-existing knowledge base provided through the Copilot Studio environment. Many AI models will offer this, where it is using their black box of knowledge or internet sources. We wanted it to be closed off. We didn't want any third-party information coming in. We didn't want it hallucinating based off of information that wasn't USF based. We wanted stuff that was just down to the facts and policies that we provided it. So that was something we had to do as well, is try to backfill some of that knowledge that was relevant, but maybe wasn't provided through the library. From there, this section in the center, and we talked about it when we kind of went through that initial walkthrough of LINQ,
Right.
is probably my favorite part of LINQ. The entire premise here is to put the users in the driver's seat, and also to kind of admit that we could be making mistakes through LINQ. We wanted it to be very transparency focused and say this isn't going to be the highest strength and highest capacity AI model they're going to work with here. This is something that is built for this purpose, and it is possible that it could make mistakes, and here's where those mistakes could come from. And if you're not happy with it, here's how we can escalate. By kind of starting with that from the get-go, one, it made testing a lot easier. It made it so that there was a baked-in reaction mechanism to kind of identifying issues. But on the flip side, it also helped us kind of see when things were working right, or when folks were just looking to talk to a live operator at that rate. There are still queries to this day that we still try to push over to those live operators because they're just better equipped for it. They can work across resources in a better way. And as a result, this kind of model helped us with that. Beyond that, the last thing I'll hit on real quick, outside of the loops that exist within it to kind of allow that conversation to continue naturally, is about all of our satisfaction rating systems and whatnot. We consistently vet LINQ, not only in its pre-alpha builds, going through its alpha builds, but even now in deployment, we continue to vet it weekly. That is both through a review of ratings that are provided to it. Unfortunately, one of the drawbacks there is a lot of users, when they know they're working with an AI, do not wait till the end of the conversation to end it on their own terms. Once they've got their answer, they will check out. However, we can also review all of those no's that we came across. If anybody wasn't happy with an answer, or if we even notice a trend that's happening that the users may be not aware of, we can go ahead and try to fix that. And as a result, it's made fixing issues on the chatbot a lot easier. What's interesting, though, from more of a programming background, is that so much of it is refining these knowledge documents. It's really very little to do at this point with the flow of the conversation, or of how the chatbot's working across topics and workflows. It's a lot more based around what does it know, and does it understand it correctly? Is it getting those patterns right? Or is it maybe mixing up different directions and different keywords? It's made it so that we've had to have our terminology and our language down pretty packed. And you'll see occasionally when we do run into issues, it's largely because something isn't made as clear as it could be. For example, I would be willing to guess the example we had before where the chatbot was struggling to provide us an immediate address, and it provided a page that had addresses. It was probably trying to figure out which of the addresses was the one that we're actually talking about there, because there's several provided to it, is my guess there. So that is something we have to keep tabs on. And while some hallucinations are smaller than others, it's something we have to stay consistent on, especially because things change every semester, whether it's staffing, whether it's departments or services. We've got to stay on top of that. And so while for smaller agents, maybe is less of an issue, anything that is dependent or that folks depend on to provide reliable answers, you have to make sure it's staying up to date consistently. I hope they gave a little bit more insight into the kind of process that it's going through, and a lot of the steps that, especially going into the development of it, that lead up to our final model.
I love it. Thanks. And in creating this workflow, you obviously had a big team in the library. Do you also work with the IT? I'm trying to understand, like, you have domain expertise in the library, and then where is the technical expertise to do all this deployment and building work coming from?
Sure. So it's actually funny you say that. So our team was actually relatively lean as far in the grand scheme, and a lot of them weren't strictly speaking technical folks. I mentioned before that a lot of the work that we actually had to put into it was about these knowledge documents and about the content that went into it. So the bigger thing was actually having folks across the library who could speak on, hey, my department would be really upset if I heard this response come out of it, or hey, here's all of the resources and context we have on this. That process was probably the most arduous and tedious to work through, because we wanted to make sure we covered everything just how people wanted it to be. And we also had to understand the resources that were already out there. We had web pages that were long out of date, that weren't navigable traditionally, but the chatbot was finding them. We had to make sure those were updated. Beyond that, trying to think, there was one other talking about I was going to hit on here.
I was going to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just mentioning one of the strengths of the development team, Evan mentioned it was lean. and it wasn't wholly technical. And I think that was one of its strengths. So we had representatives from various different public service points in the building that were really key to gathering a lot of this information. So while maybe half the team had experience with coding and with building on the back end, half the team did not. And that led to a lot of different perspectives within the group that helped us incorporate all of that variety of knowledge into the link development process.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were unique too, in that we were what was considered by our central IT unit at USF as a citizen developer approach. This is
Mhm.
a lot more doable as a whole because of the Copilot Studio environment, which I'll pop over to it real quick if you'd like.
Yeah,
This right
please do.
here,
Okay.
this is the environment we use actually to build out Link. And what's really nice here is
So
it's,
just to
go ahead.
contextualize for my
Yeah.
students, there is a Microsoft Copilot developer license that the University of South Florida has, and teachers and students have access to like some part of it. We're using Copilot in our classes. Students can create agents, they can chat, they can put and upload files. But there's also many other features of that you can request the IT to kind of
Yeah.
work with you on. And I'm guessing the library, because they also had that grant, they were able to reach out to the library to do something a lot more customized and deep. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say it's something that happened in that process though is that we actually ended up making it more customized on our own than anything IT had to do. They kind of gave us the access to work within this, but because of the approach
Okay,
we took,
love it.
it allowed us to customize it a lot more aggressively and build it to our liking.
Okay.
So you'll see if I'll dive into our topics, and these are the kind of these specialty areas that the chatbot can go into that aren't based out of a knowledge document, but are based out of, hey, I see you're talking about like an emergency scenario. Let's handle the emergency topic here. These topics
Mhm.
were all built out for us. We even technically have a jokes topic if somebody were to ask for jokes. But these are all built out by us. And then from there, within them, all the contents within them. Now, IT is probably happy to help us work through this a little bit better, but it was really nice because we actually ended up building out certain functionality and processes that IT hadn't built out within their own chatbots because it just wasn't part of the workflows that they were working with. We wanted something that was
Interesting.
custom specifically to our needs. And while that did require more time and playing around with Copilot Studio, we didn't find it to be too impossible. And I think a big part of that is because of the no code environment, or at least low code. I will jump
Yeah.
over to an example here. We'll do
Yes,
this
please.
is our opening pass so that your students can kind of see this. So when the chatbot first opens up, right
Hmm.
here, and I'll go ahead and skip this so you guys can see it. Okay, perfect. So you can see here it has pushed out these messages right here. The
Hmm.
first one that we're actually seeing is this message right here. These are pre-canned messages that are going to come out no matter what. This one starts to go from here and starts working through,
Ah,
either
okay.
picks one of the message variations, so it just feels natural every time. Provides
Nice.
quick replies that then go into different branching paths that we can go down.
Hmm.
And you can see these then go into different topics. And it really starts to make a lot of sense mentally once you start seeing this.
Yeah,
If you were to just type, though, that's where we get over here to our generative response. And this is a
got
custom
it.
topic we built out that specifically works for those generative responses.
And can you also give us a sense of what the knowledge base looks like? Like, let's
Yeah,
say,
100%. I'd be happy to. So let
yeah.
me jump over to our knowledge over here real quick. That'll be the quickest way to see it. So our
Mhm.
knowledge is split across two different types of formats. One of those is websites.
Mhm.
The website we pull the most from is lib.usf.edu. In fact, we actually ran into this issue. We still have it technically trying to index it, but it won't be able to. We actually offer these lib guides, and they're really great sources of
Right.
information. But we found out that because they're hosted through a third party, that third party has a block on AI indexing. And as a result, we weren't actually able to even use a source of our own
Interesting.
information there. So that was something we had to keep in mind. But yes, that library website and all the subpages under lib.usf.edu are covered there. But then the bulk of it beyond that are these knowledge documents. So these cover a range of things, everything from certain spaces in the library, hours, guidance and best practices, things to just basically cover any kind of question that a student would ask. And these are all formatted somewhat uniformly, but they all have little differences within them. I will try to pull up our services one. Let me pop over real quick. I'm going to pop over to
Mhm.
Box real quick. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
I want to pull up one of those knowledge documents. And what's really cool is if your students go through that LibGuide page that we were talking about that showed link and gave that kind of explanation, everyone's actually able to access these knowledge documents. That was a big thing we wanted to do because we wanted this project to be something that folks could case study and to review those knowledge documents and say, hey, this is actually like, this is really well done, or maybe this isn't as well done as far as the format, because we could not find, there was not a standardized format for how to build a chatbot knowledge document, especially for the library. And each, we've noticed that each model is working a little bit differently, but this is those knowledge documents. If I jump into, I'll go ahead and do services so you guys can see those. And these are formatted in some interesting ways. Not that they're not super hard to read, I would say, but you'll notice a lot of bullet points and structuring out. And this was very intentionally done so that the chatbot would follow them in a very structured and grouped way. That grouping was really key to us because we noticed it would pull links or content from different sections if it was all one blurb. So even things like our model, we noticed having issues with hyperlinking. So we actually started posting the full links in there, hyperlinks, so that maybe it'll pull up the hyperlink, but at least it'll have the full a link ready to go there. These are grouped in sections that made sense, at least to us. And if we can have some, if resources kind of cross over in any way, it was really nice to group them in similar areas because the chatbot does definitely use those groupings as a way to kind of establish
and the categories and things are stuff that you built out in consultation with library stakeholders, each one from a different department, and them having the final say. Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did make it nice when we were able to ask, like, hey, does this blurb work for you? Would this cover it loosely if the chatbot said this? Or do you want it to go further than that? So very, very cool stuff here.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
This is excellent. So far we've kind of spoken about the products of your AI chatbot. We've also got a really nice deep dive into the processes that you followed to build it. And I want to jump gears now and move to Lieta. And Lieta, you already very kindly showed us some of the principles and policies that guide the creation of Link. Can you also kind of help us learn a little bit more about how copyright plays into this? I see that the knowledge of the chatbot is built entirely through the library's own resources, but does it also have access to, for example, some of the copyrighted materials, the books, the articles that the library has access to, or is it just you and your materials?
Well, right now, other than the LLM, so we know the large, massive LLMs that are being shared across several different platforms, like in Microsoft, they have been trained on copyrighted material, right? And there are several court cases still sort of ongoing to figure out if what they did was fair use. There is a lot of discussion that it probably was to some extent, with some interesting specification on whether or not the material used was legally obtained, so not through a shadow library or something. So there is copyrighted material sort of buried within the large language model that we're using in Link. But after that, yes, we are aiming it currently at all documentation that we've created in-house. Now, how that works within the USF system is, of course, we have copyright law, but we're also governed by USF policy, right? And also, as we work here, by work for hire. So everything created by the libraries can be used by the libraries, is owned by USF, and that is what we're aiming at right now. We have had several questions about being able to access library collections, which are largely, if they're electronic, licensed from other platforms. Link doesn't do that right now, and what we would probably try to get it to do first is to access the catalog so it can find indexes of those materials, not necessarily read them in total. A lot of those vendor platforms where we have our ebooks and our e-journals and things like that, they have various restrictions on how that data can be accessed. Which if you're looking to build new models using data like that, then you sort of have to go towards that vendor's terms and conditions to make sure that it all fits within that scope. So I don't know if we would ever really push it that far to attempt to get into the databases where the content is stored. But I think perhaps the next step for it would be getting to the indexes, which are partially created by USF libraries, but also other libraries on a larger scheme nationally and internationally. That's where our catalog records come from. And for the most part, those catalog records, the metadata has been shared with no rights applied. So it's very much a collaborative system among libraries. And it won't be a problem for us to move it into the catalog listings to try and help with, say, finding a book or a specific article.
Okay, wow. So there's all kinds of copyright layers, and you're navigating it, I'm guessing, on a day-to-day basis or probably a minute-to-minute basis because things are changing so rapidly. But this is really helpful to know. Uh, Copyright is one of the areas, but the other big area that many of my students have also been talking about, many of the things that we're also concerned about is environmental impact and other kinds of costs that come with AI usage. So any thoughts on how you all have been thinking about that aspect of LLMs and Link?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, at least on the environmental end, I think one of our biggest things that we were proud of with Link is that it's a relatively efficient model. It tries to minimize the amount of interactions. And while some folks will sometimes critique, like, oh, this response was a little long or whatever, it does a lot to try to minimize that as a whole. I will say that we have tried not to have it do anything too exhaustive by nature. It's really just recalling through like a RAG-based process, different documents and reference points. If we get to a later point, and we have talked about it, of starting to use API calls and starting to dip into third-party tool sets and have it connect over to those, we could get into slightly more intensive processes. But for the most part, we just wanted to, I think this was kind of in a play, and while it doesn't naturally convert into an environmental dialogue, we wanted to just be more efficient in the library. And this wasn't just to create better responses, but also to put like less strain on our chat representatives. For example, we used to have folks who had to cover chat during hurricanes because it was one of our touch points. And with Link, we have somebody or something on chat full time. So it's no longer that same kind of concern. Additionally, if a librarian was out, they would have to find coverage to cover chat. And while we still encourage that, it's a little more easygoing when you have something always covering chat in some regard. And so ultimately, while I don't have the specific measurements of environmental pull, and that is one of the gray areas, is we are working with a third party of Microsoft still. There is some gray that is going on in the back end there. We felt pretty good about it in comparison to some of the other AI ventures we've seen that are a little bit more blindly being deployed. We try to measure it, and we do keep track of all the usage and interactions that are happening. And that is something we've been working consistently with IT on. But that's a great question and something we want to monitor more. But there is a intense debate about that for sure.
And some of the other issues we know happened with the use of generative AI too. I mean, in addition to the use of copyrighted material, is about the transparency and citation. And we've built that directly into Link. I think Evan showed quite a bit, but also about privacy and data security. So we're not currently asking for any user information. I think like most chat services, there are a number of IPs gathered in a chat. Those don't get shared outside of the libraries. We have very strict policies on privacy, and they're only used as advertised just for improvement of the product, not for training, since it's very closed system. We're not actually training an LLM. It's used by humans to update our knowledge documents that the unit will then be pointed to.
Amazing. Nice. So we've covered environment, we've covered copyright, privacy and security, academic integrity, and things like that. So that covers the third bucket that my students are thinking about, which is AI policies. And now finally moving to the final bucket, which is about public connections to AI. What kind of initial thoughts do you have about how users are actually engaging with the final deployed version of Link? What kind of problems are they facing? What kind of value are they drawing on? Any insights on user experiences with Link?
Yeah, I'll touch on this in a two-part. So first off, I'll say our initial reactions through our focus groups, and then kind of our reactions as we come into fall. So our focus groups kind of put on blast Link in many ways. We actually branded a lot of them as Break Our Bot because we wanted folks to kind of get in there and like try to mess with it and try to push it to its limits. And those initial reactions, I think as a whole, were pretty good. I think the biggest thing was faculty in particular, but to some degree students as well, but faculty in particular having different expectations for the AI model. Even though we didn't provide, like, this is what the AI is going to do outside of it being a chatbot for library resources, there were expectations that it should find them articles. There should be expectations that it should be able to manage their account for them, which gets us into a whole bucket of privacy and copyright issues there very quickly. But they weren't considering that because they have seen AI models that have made life faster and connecting across resources. And while that's totally something that I'd love for us to build up to, we weren't trying to overdo it. We were trying to do something that was measured, that we could really control the environment and work up to. However, as we come close to fall, the majority of the users that are using it, I believe at this point, are students. We do have some faculty that are using it. And because we provided them the chance to either use the human or the chat, the like AI chat option, we've seen a little bit of a split. I've seen it go about, I wouldn't say it's exactly 50-50, but we've seen about half our users go towards the human operators and then about half answer their questions through Ask Librarian. We are going to continue. We actually have an assessment we're doing at the end of the semester, looking at those interactions and how those went about. But as a whole, I'd imagine that a good chunk of those folks are folks who are choosing to go with the chatbot, are folks who are either looking for quick answer, or they're not wanting to look. They're not wanting to talk with a live representative. I know that sounds silly, but we do have some folks who do appreciate just talking to like a virtual response, because they can ask those maybe more like, I get a lot of like really simple, like, where's the bathroom questions out of it. And those are worthwhile to ask. That's important questions, but maybe you don't want to call the front desk. Maybe you don't want to talk to a librarian just for that question. These are all important things. And so as a whole, it's actually been relatively quiet as the falls come about. We've actually gotten less reports than we did over the summer, and we've seen more usage. And I think a large part of that is because it just kind of naturally feels like it's part of the ecosystem, and we didn't try to overextend it. It's not running into major hallucinations because it's not enabled to. The worst hallucinations I find it does are things of like, oh, it kind of left this portion out, or it's kind of generalizing these things, but they're only things Lieta and I and other library professionals notice, that as long as it gives a good fallback contact, which it almost always does, we're pretty much in good hands and it's doing its job there. So for the most part, it's done a pretty good job, and it's really opened up a can of worms for folks who are interested in trying to see where it can go, or if we can do other things like it. And I think for us and the team, we're just kind of looking and seeing like, what are ways that we can grow it naturally without compromising its initial goals and values, because we've accomplished what we set out to do in the grant project. So at this point, where we take it is kind of up to us, which is both exciting and also daunting, because you don't want to mess up a good thing.
Right. Lieta, do you want to add something to that?
I suppose just to highlight, Evan mentioned in the focus groups different expectations of it. We've been very keen to track those, especially as it's been deployed, just because it is closed and it is contained. So it's not going to give you an answer on something the libraries don't do. If you need to get a parking pass or something like that, it might not be the best place to send your question to, even though people in the library have been very comfortable with managing and referring those questions, because the library often gets questions about other services. So yeah, those are expectations that we sort of monitor to see where Link might go into the future. But for the most part, I've noticed that a lot of the use has been pretty neutral or positive. We do also keep running a suggestion or feedback separate form. So if somebody runs into a problem with Link and maybe they're not following the ability to say, no, this didn't answer my question, or just say directly back to Link what the problem was, they can go ahead and send their suggestions and their input directly to the team, and then the team monitors that form for suggestions.
Okay, excellent. This has been really insightful. I think my students will get really inspired to build their own AI agents and think about all these complex issues, how to balance the functional with the critical, how to think about utility with ethics, and come up with something beautiful by the end of this class. I really appreciate the time that you've given. Before we sign off, I just want to do something that I like to do with all the people that I interview. I want you to imagine that you have a crystal ball in front of you, and do some speculative thinking with me. What do you think AI is going to look like in 5 years from now? What do you think is going to happen? LLMs, users, libraries, reading, writing, any predictions that come to mind?
I've
Okay. You got it,
I
Molly?
was I was gonna jump in. I've been really interested in following this idea of the digital twin, actually, especially in areas and professions where we do a lot of information output. So we have documents, organizational documents within the university. I've written a lot just for, budget proposals and whatever, but all of that writing carries, my stamp and the way that I would respond to something. So it would be possible to say feed um, a small agent with all of that material and create a digital twin that would answer questions the way I would answer questions. From a copyright standpoint, I find this particularly interesting because, as I mentioned, Link is trained on all USF owned content based on work for
Right.
hire. So then,
Right.
if you're training a digital twin based on your professional output, who owns that digital twin then, even though it's part of your identity?
Interesting.
I think questions like that will begin to become larger because more people will be trying out these ideas.
Wow.
And that's what I'm really following and sort of looking ahead at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
No,
Even
that is really cool stuff. You've got me worried now, Leetta. No, I was gonna say I have, especially with my work in research methods for like with AI. I think one of the areas that we've seen one of the biggest things that's held back AI implemented research is the siloing of academic literature from these AI models to actually get access to them and conduct quality research. And while some platforms early on, some AI tool sets like Elicit, SciSpace, and Consensus have used some open access repositories in order to fill that gap and then expect their users to upload, we're seeing more and more publishers that are starting to become comfortable and make deals where they will provide full text access of their papers to these AI models to index and have those models reference those papers, but not provide the papers in full to end users. The possibilities that provides for evidence-based practice for researchers, especially for folks at USF, if we could get those resources that we own and subscribe to connected to your best AI tool sets, the amount of research we could conduct and review in a massive amount of time or in a very minimal amount of time would be groundbreaking. I think the way that research is going to be conducted, I think we've been slowly inching towards this, and the folks who I've seen who are power users of AI, it's drastically changed their workflows. I think the added layer of, oh, okay, cool, now it's all connected to our resources. Like we have, and every one of our major databases at USF is working on some AI discovery asset. The more and more we can connect these silos together, and I think a lot of these publishers are interested in that because it just gets their content more viewed and more leveraged, the more we're going to see rapid fire research, which is really exciting because it's going to mean more undergraduates doing research. It's going to mean more community members and even better stuff from our graduate levels that I'm pretty excited about. And I think that the need for experts in these fields that we're training today is going to become even more important to kind of discern what's good and what's relevant there and think critically amongst those resources. So it's really exciting stuff for me. I'm a little bit more on the optimist side, but I've just seen those silos appear and then start to be worn down over time, and I'm really excited to see where that continues to go.
Wow. Okay, you've given me a lot to think about, and thank you so much for joining us. I'll keep you posted on how this class goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing news.